When Johnny Carson passed away in January of 2005, the world of television went silent. For over 30 years, he had been more than a late-night host, he was a part of people's lives. Every night, millions tuned in to watch him on The Tonight Show. He was the man who made America laugh before bed, the calm voice at the end of a long day, and the reason so many people dreamed of making it in Hollywood. But when he died, something unexpected happened. There was no grand funeral, no red carpet memorial, no big public event. Instead, there was only silence. His family quietly announced that there would be no public service. His body was cremated, and his ashes were given to his wife, Alexis. The decision shocked Hollywood. For someone so famous, so beloved, it felt strange that his goodbye would be private. But those who really knew Johnny Carson knew that this was exactly how he wanted it. Johnny Carson was a performer in public, but a mystery in private. His friend Dick Cavett once said that Johnny could talk to millions of people on television without breaking a sweat, but face-to-face, he could barely hold a small conversation. Ed McMahon, his longtime sidekick, once joked, Johnny was comfortable in front of 20 million people but completely uncomfortable in front of 20. That line summed him up perfectly. For all his fame, Johnny Carson was deeply shy and private. He didn't like parties, he avoided crowds, and he almost never showed up at Hollywood events. He preferred to stay home, away from the spotlight. He was known for his sharp wit and smooth delivery on TV, but in real life, he was quiet, thoughtful, and sometimes distant. People close to him often said that even after years of friendship, they still didn't really know Johnny. That was why, when the news broke that there would be no public funeral, it felt sad but fitting. In death, he finally got what he had always wanted, privacy. But even though there was no place for the public to gather, tributes poured in from around the world. President George W. Bush called Carson a steady and reassuring presence. Jay Leno, who had taken over The Tonight Show after Johnny retired, called him the gold standard. And David Letterman, who many thought Johnny had wanted as his true successor, said something even deeper, all of us who came after are pretenders. We will not see the likes of him again. Fans left flowers and notes on his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, and others gathered at Johnny Carson Park, right across from the NBC studios where he had filmed his show for decades. For millions of people, Johnny's death felt like losing a friend. But even in that grief, a strange question began to surface. People whispered about someone connected to Johnny, someone whose story wasn't told during those tributes, someone who had once been part of his life but ended up erased from it. And that question led to one of the most emotional stories in show business, the story of Johnny Carson and Joan Rivers. Now, most people remember Joan Rivers as the bold, sharp-tongued comedian who never held back. She was funny, fierce, and fearless. But long before she was famous, she was just another struggling comic in New York City, trying to survive. In the early 1960s, Joan Rivers performed in small clubs around Greenwich Village. She often worked for almost nothing, sometimes the audience would pass around a hat for money, and she said there were nights when the hat never came back. She lived out of her car, took temp jobs during the day, and performed at night. She got turned down by talent agents and club owners again and again. She auditioned for The Tonight Show 7 times and failed every single one. By 1965, she was exhausted, broke, and ready to quit comedy altogether. Then, in February of that year, she got what she thought would be her last chance, a small, last-minute spot on The Tonight Show. It wasn't even meant for her. Her manager had arranged it as a favor because he also represented Bill Cosby. Joan went in thinking it was her final try. But that night, something magical happened. The audience loved her. She connected instantly, every joke landed, every line hit perfectly. It was one of those rare nights when everything just works. And the most important person in the room, Johnny Carson himself, noticed. When she finished her set, Carson invited her to sit down next to him on the famous couch, something that meant, "You've made it." Then, on live national television, he looked at her and said, "You're going to be a star." That one line changed Joan Rivers' life forever. She later said that she looked behind her, thinking he must be talking to someone else. But Carson meant it. He believed in her. From that moment, everything began to change for Joan. She became a regular guest on The Tonight Show, appearing again and again over the years. Their chemistry on screen was electric. She was fast, funny, and fearless, and Johnny loved that about her. Audiences loved watching them together. She made him laugh in a way few others could. Over the next 2 decades, she appeared on the show almost 100 times. Their connection grew so strong that in 1983, when Johnny went on vacation, Joan Rivers was named the show's permanent guest host. That was a big deal. It meant that when Johnny wasn't there, she was in charge. The world saw her as the natural successor, the queen in waiting to the king of late-night television. For Joan, it was a dream come true. She adored Johnny and was deeply loyal to him. She turned down offers from other networks because she didn't want to do anything that might hurt him. She once said, "I owed him everything. He handed me my career." But there was something hidden behind the smiles and laughter. For all the warmth they shared on camera, their relationship off camera was almost non-existent. Joan later wrote, "Our friendship existed entirely on camera. During the commercial breaks, when the red light went off, we had nothing to say to each other. It wasn't because they disliked each other, it was because Johnny was, by nature, distant. He didn't open up easily. He didn't have close friends in the traditional sense. Even his co-workers, who spent decades by his side, often said they never got past the wall he kept up. That distance between them would later become the crack that shattered everything." By the mid-1980s, television was changing. There were new networks, new shows, and a hunger for fresh talent. Johnny Carson was still the biggest name in late night, but he was getting older, and rumors about his retirement were starting to spread. Joan Rivers, meanwhile, was at the height of her fame. She was beloved, respected, and more popular than ever. But in 1985, things started to shift behind the scenes. Carson had just signed a new 2-year contract with NBC, keeping him on The Tonight Show. Joan, on the other hand, was offered only a 1-year deal. That might sound small, but in Hollywood, it sent a message. NBC didn't see her as essential. Joan felt uneasy. She had spent years proving her loyalty to the network and to Johnny, yet she was being treated like she could be replaced at any time. Around the same period, executives at a brand new television network called Fox reached out to her. They offered her something no one else had ever offered, her very own late-night show, The Late Show starring Joan Rivers. It would air opposite The Tonight Show, in the same time slot. For the first time in her life, Joan had a chance to be the star, not the guest. But there was one big problem: Johnny Carson. Joan knew that if she took the deal without telling him, it would look like betrayal. So before signing the contract, she tried to call Johnny personally. She later said she wanted to tell him first, out of respect. But when she called, he didn't pick up. She left a message, but he never called back. Eventually, the news broke before she could reach him, and when he found out, he was furious. Johnny Carson saw Joan's new show as a direct attack. In his eyes, she wasn't just starting her own show, she was becoming his competition. And to Johnny, loyalty mattered more than almost anything else. He had given Joan her start, made her famous, and trusted her with his show. To him, this move felt like betrayal. Without saying a word, he cut her off completely. He never spoke to her again. What came next was heartbreaking. Joan Rivers was banned from The Tonight Show entirely. NBC refused to mention her name on air. She tried to explain, but Johnny wouldn't take her calls. For decades, she remained blacklisted from the show she had once called home. The pain of that loss never left her. She often said that losing Johnny's friendship was one of the greatest heartbreaks of her life. And then, as if things couldn't get worse, tragedy struck again. Just months after her new show launched, the ratings began to fall. Critics were harsh, and Fox executives became impatient. Eventually, they fired her, and, in a cruel twist, they also fired her husband, Edgar Rosenberg, who had been producing the show. Devastated and humiliated, Edgar took his own life. Joan was shattered. She said later that she blamed herself, for the show's failure, for the fallout with Johnny, for everything. she spiraled into depression and nearly quit show business altogether. But Joan Rivers was nothing if not resilient. Over time, she fought her way back. She built a new career through stand-up comedy, television specials, red carpet shows, and later, Fashion Police. She became known as a survivor, someone who refused to let tragedy define her. Still, no matter how much success she regained, the pain of losing Johnny Carson never completely went away. Meanwhile, Johnny Carson never spoke publicly about Joan again. Friends and colleagues said he was deeply hurt and felt betrayed. To him, loyalty was sacred. Once someone broke his trust, there was no going back. He was known to hold grudges quietly but firmly. Even in retirement, when he lived a peaceful life away from the cameras, he never reached out. Over time, younger generations forgot the details, but the tension between them became a legend in Hollywood, a cautionary tale about friendship, fame, and pride. People debated for years who was right. Some said Joan had every right to build her own show, she had earned it. Others said Johnny's anger was understandable, he felt blindsided by someone he had trusted completely. In truth, both were victims of misunderstanding and ego, caught in the painful side of fame. When Johnny Carson passed away in 2005, Joan Rivers was not at his funeral, but that's because there wasn't one. His family kept everything private, honoring his lifelong wish to stay out of the spotlight. But the irony of that silence wasn't lost on those who knew their story. For decades, the two had shared a connection that millions could see but few understood. When he died, it was as if a part of her story ended, too. Later, in interviews, Joan said that she wished she could have made peace with him. She once said softly, "I would have loved to have talked to him again. I really would have." You could hear the pain in her voice, even after all those years. She didn't hate him. She never spoke badly about him. She always said, he was the best there ever was. The truth is, both of them were complicated people, talented, proud, and human. Their story wasn't just about show business, it was about forgiveness, pride, and how even the closest bonds can be broken by misunderstanding. In the years that followed Johnny Carson's death, the story of his friendship and fallout with Joan Rivers became something bigger than gossip, it became a lesson about fame, loyalty, and regret. In Hollywood, where relationships are often temporary and success comes and goes, their story stood out because it was real. It wasn't about ratings or contracts. It was about two people who deeply respected each other but never found a way to heal. For decades, The Tonight Show remained off-limits to Joan Rivers. Even as new hosts came and went, the band stayed in place. She was never invited, never mentioned. Then, something remarkable happened nearly 30 years later. In 2014, Jimmy Fallon, who had taken over as host, personally invited Joan back to The Tonight Show. When she walked onto that stage again, the audience erupted in applause. It was emotional, like a piece of television history had finally come full circle. Joan smiled, made a few jokes, and you could almost feel a sense of peace in that moment. Even though Johnny was gone, it felt as if a silent chapter had finally closed. A few months later, Joan Rivers passed away at the age of 81. Her funeral, unlike Johnny's, was a grand event. Friends, comedians, actors, and fans came from all over the world to celebrate her life. There were tears, laughter, and stories, the kind of send-off she would have loved. And in a way, it balanced the story. Johnny had chosen silence in death, Joan was sent off with applause. Two very different endings for two very different people, bound forever by one unforgettable story. Looking back, it's easy to see their relationship as tragic. But it's also deeply human. Johnny Carson was a man who valued privacy, control, and loyalty. He had seen betrayal before, from business partners, friends, even network executives. When Joan left, he didn't see it as ambition, he saw it as personal. He built emotional walls so high that no one could climb over them once they were up. That was both his strength and his weakness. He protected himself, but he also shut out chances for healing. Joan Rivers, on the other hand, was a woman of heart and drive. She loved deeply, fought hard, and refused to give up. Her decision to take the Fox deal wasn't out of greed or arrogance, it was survival. She had been told no her whole life, and when someone finally said yes, she grabbed the opportunity. But in doing so, she lost the person who had given her everything. That's what made the story so painful. Neither of them was the villain. They were simply two people trying to protect their dreams.